The 2023 deer gun season opens Friday, November 10th at noon Central Time. Today, we're visiting with Wildlife Division Chief Casey Anderson to go over all the details for this year's season. I'm Mike Anderson with the North Dakota Game and Fish Department.
Deer hunting in North Dakota is, it's what some people would say kind of a big deal. There's whole families, extended families that like to try to get out and deer hunt for that short period of time in the fall. Especially being a very agricultural state, you've got a lot of folks that are working hard to get crops off, get hay hauled in, and it seems like that deer season is right about the time that some of that stuff really slows down and they have an opportunity to get together with family. And so, deer hunting gets to be something that a lot of folks look forward to in North Dakota. Unfortunately, the last few years our deer population has been trending down, and really a lot of that is habitat and the types of habitats that are out there. We came out of an unprecedented winter that we haven't seen in quite some time, probably the closest since 1996. It really hurt the deer herd that was already in a downward trend because of habitat loss and other things like EHD that we had on the landscape that set some of the whitetails back. So we're coming out of a terrible winter that we had that, especially as you went east across the state, southeast across the state, we had pockets up in the northwest that didn't have winter quite as bad, but enough winter to still put stress on critters out there. And so, coming out of that, we lost deer in the wintertime, more in certain areas than others, but we also probably affected the ability for deer to bring off fawns, at least twins. Our goal with the license allocation that we put out was to hopefully be a little more conservative and allow the deer to maybe have a decent year, come out, cross our fingers that we have a decent winter, and then fawn production should start kicking back in. We are also a little bit behind in some areas because of the EHD outbreak on whitetails especially. And so yeah, we were pretty conservative with licenses this year just to try to help those populations in the future, but we still want opportunity for folks to go out and enjoy some deer hunting. So there's numerous aspects that we look at when we come up with numbers. For one, we do our harvest surveys. That tells us quite a bit of information. It tells us, what was on the landscape last fall. When we look at things like success rate or number of deer that folks had seen on the landscape last fall. And then also, by the harvest success rate, it kind of shows accessibility of those deer, and were people seeing enough deer to harvest. And we shoot for a 70% success rate typically. And that seems to be a spot where we've found that, landowners are acceptable with the number of hunters that are maybe on the landscape with that 70% success. Hunters are pretty comfortable with the 70% success. It's kind of like those that put the effort in shoot a deer, those that don't, are doing it for different reasons, enjoyment or whatever that is, maybe don't get a deer. But also we look at our winter aerial surveys, which, blessing and a curse, we had that bad winter, but we were able to survey the entire state and get a pretty good count. And we even did some follow-up survey later into the spring, which kind of told us what type of winter death loss we had maybe gotten on the landscape. And so we were able to calibrate those licenses to kind of match that and be conservative, but still allow some opportunity. Yeah, so as most people know, deer aren't spread evenly across the state. We manage deer by populations within their units, and so, you may be in a deer hunting unit, and think there's a lot of deer, and the person on the other side of the unit might think there's hardly any. But when we allocate licenses, we allocate for that entire unit. The purpose of those units, it's kind of broken down into sub-regions across the state, which are habitats, landscapes that are kind of similar, and then we break those down further into units, just so that we can allocate licenses and keep people spread out a little bit, but it also makes sure that we harvest spread out across the state. So whitetail deer statewide, they're down. that's going to be something that some people will notice. There will be pockets where there's good populations. You know, those areas that we were hit hard with EHD along the Missouri River and maybe west of the Missouri River, there's going to be, you know, less. Now, luckily those areas didn't get hit quite as hard with winter. By Bismarck and the Missouri River there they did, but when you get up to Williston and that country, there was less of winter up there. And so it's just going to vary across the state. One thing that we run into, of course, is, you know, habitat conditions. Last winter was a good example of showing us what we're missing, you know, in a lot of cases. And so there was times where we were up in a plane flying over the landscape and it was nothing but snow sticking. I mean, there's nothing sticking out of that snow. And so, you know, in a state like this, winter cover is a big deal. And even grass on the landscape that catches snow, that doesn't allow things like cattail wetlands to fill in as fast with snow, really does help extend a deer's ability to make it through the winter. So for mule deer populations, our big game biologist just got done flying, but information I got from them, it looks like mule deer populations were kind of different across the Badlands. We had areas with really good fawn production, areas with pretty minimal fawn production, so we definitely saw the response from the bad winter we had affecting them. Looked like the buck to doe ratio was in pretty good shape, pretty stable. However, you know, a lot of the bucks were a little bit on the younger side compared to other years. But all in all, habitat conditions in the Badlands are excellent after this year's rains and growing season that we had. And so, you know, barring another bad winter, mule deer should have the opportunity to rebound fairly decently. So for the most part this year, we don't have many regulation changes. The one thing that folks will have to do is just glance over those regulations so they know them. We do have some carcass transportation regulations that have changed in our CWD proclamation, and so folks will want to make sure they know what those regulations are so they can properly take care of carcasses and things like that. Hunters can expect this fall to, you know, probably have to work a little bit harder to find deer. Like we said, we've had a pretty nice fall. You know, things are looking good as far as crops being off, and so deer will be, you know, in a lot less places as far as hiding situations. And so I think if people want to put the work in, they'll be able to find a deer to harvest. Good luck and be safe.